Okay, so today we're going to talk about how do we add fractions that have different denominators. So far we've looked at adding fractions that have the same denominator, but what do we do when they have different denominators? Well, you can see here, we're not entirely sure what to do yet, but I'm going to show you. So what we need to do is we need to make them have the same denominator. Well, here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to take both bottom numbers, the denominator, and make a chart with them. All right, so there's my denominators on the top. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to list their multiples. So the first multiple will always be that number times 1. So 3 times 1 is 3. 4 times 1 is 4. Then I'm going to list the second multiple, which is just going to be that number times 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. Then I'm going to multiply by 3. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 3 is 12. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going listing their multiples until I find a number that they have in common. So next up I do 3 times 4, which is 12, and 4 times 4, which is 16. Now I can stop here because I see I have a number in common. This number that they have in common is called the least common denominator. I'll refer to it in class as the LCD. So what I'm going to do with the LCD is I'm going to change both of the fractions, the original fractions, 1/3 and 1/4, into fractions that are over 12 or that have a denominator of 12. Now I have to make sure that these new fractions are equivalent to the original fractions. Here's how I do that. I need to list what did I multiply 3 times to get to 12. Well, to figure that out, I can go back to my chart. And I had to do 3 times 4 to get to 12. So I'm going to say times 4. Now here's an important rule for creating equivalent fractions. Whatever I do to the bottom number, I also have to do to the top number. This also works vice versa. Whatever I do to the top number, I also have to do to the bottom number. So in this case, I'm multiplying the bottom number times 4. So I need to multiply the top number times 4. 1 times 4 gives me 4. So we're saying that 4/12 is the same thing as 1/3. Now let's finish 1/4. I need to figure out what did I multiply 4 by to get 12. So I'm going to go back to my list and I see that 4 times 3 gets me 12. So I'm multiplying 4 times 3. And again, whatever I do to the bottom, I also have to do to the top. I multiplied the bottom by 3, I have to multiply the top by 3. And 1 times 3 is 3. Now I'm going to take these equivalent fractions and rewrite the original problem. So remember, the original problem was 1/3 plus 1/4. We changed 1/3 and 1/4 into 4/12 and 3/12. So we rewrite the problem as 4/12 plus 3/12. Now when I'm adding fractions that have the same denominator, all I have to do is add across the top and keep the denominator the same. So if my denominator is going to stay the same, then I already know that 12 is the denominator in my answer. Now I just have to add across the top, 4 plus 3, and I get 7. So here's one more example, 1/4 plus 5/8. Again, they don't have the same denominator, and I don't have to draw my chart and find the lowest common denominator because I know with proper number sense that 8 is a multiple of 4. So all I have to do is change 4 into 8 and then I'll have the same denominator. Well, to change 4 into 8, I just have to multiply it by 2. So 4 times 2 is 8, and whatever I do to the bottom number, I have to do to the top number, so 1 times 2 is 2, and so I change 1/4 into 2/8. Now I rewrite the problem, 2/8 plus 5/8, and I end up with 7/8. So that's an easier way to do it without having to list all the multiples of these, because I know that 8 is already a multiple of 4. Now we're going to look at a line graph that has 2 lines on it. So earlier we looked at a line graph and how to create a line graph, but it was just a single line. So here is a graph that shows the lowest temperatures in Portland versus Los Angeles. And Portland is the green line and Los Angeles is the red line. We can look at these two lines to make comparisons about the temperatures in both cities. So the lowest temperature in January for Portland is around 30, and the lowest temperature in Los Angeles in January is around 40. When we get to April, there's even more of a gap. Lowest temperature in Portland is somewhere in the 30s, and the lowest temperature in Los Angeles is somewhere in the 50s. Now the gap really closes when we get into July. Lowest temperature for Portland is somewhere in the 50s, lowest temperature for Los Angeles is 60 or more, somewhere around there, but they're real close. Once we get to November, it starts to widen the gap a little bit again. But we can clearly see, especially by labeling them with different colors, we can clearly see the difference in temperatures between these two cities.